So besides the question, what do contractions feel like? The main question I get is, what is it like to push a baby out? Well, it is like pushing a flaming watermelon out of a fleshy hole the size of a baseball. Just kidding. Honestly, it is totally different for each woman. I've attended the births of women that did this technique called laboring down, where they mainly just let the body, the natural explosive reflex, push baby out. And then at the very end, they did like 2 or 3 strong pushes and baby was out. I, on the other hand, had my feet in those metal stirrups and I was like pushing like this for 3 hours. So it can range from like 10 minutes to hours, and it feels like all sorts of different things. But I'll get into more specifics, don't worry. But to know that unfortunately, there's no way to know exactly what it will feel like for you. So what does it feel like? Okay, one thing I can say is typically it's actually a lot less uncomfortable than women expect it to be, because the thing is, baby's head is pushing on nerves as it's coming out, which actually can create a bit of a numbing sensation. And usually at this point, you've had so many endorphins built up that you're actually a lot more comfortable than you expect. And of course, if you have an epidural, you just feel a lot of pressure. But even if you don't have that epidural, you might still feel fairly numb. And again, with both an unmedicated birth or an epidural birth, during pushing, you will likely feel like you need to take the biggest poop of your life. There's like so much pressure down there in the rectum everywhere. So, oh, and then the ring of fire. So a lot of us hear about that ring of fire, and that is describing this like burning sensation that some women feel when baby's head is crowning. I've known some women that feel that, but I've also known other women, myself included, that didn't feel that at all. Again, it's incredibly intense, but for me at least, it was actually the most comfortable phase of labor. It was the most exhausting for me, but it really was a lot less uncomfortable than all of the other phases of labor, especially active labor. So hopefully it won't actually be as uncomfortable as you expect. But it is intense. Just because it's not incredibly uncomfortable doesn't mean it's not super duper intense. Okay, what can make it harder? So one of the main things that can make the pushing phase harder is having a posterior or sunny side up baby. And this means that their face is pointing the front of your body instead of the back, which is how we really want the baby to be. But you can still absolutely have a vaginal birth with a posterior sunny side up baby. The thing here is it can just make it a little bit trickier to get past that pelvic bone, but it's totally possible. I have a video on this channel called How to Reposition a Posterior or Sunny Side Up Baby. I recommend watching that for tips on shifting baby before you go into labor, ideally. Some other things that can make the pushing phase harder is lying on your back, because when you're and this is, I was laying on my back when I was pushing, and let me tell you, it made it a lot harder. When you're lying on your back, you're not utilizing gravity. Your birth canal becomes more narrow. So ideally, you're on all fours, you're squatting, you're laying on your side. All of those positions are better than lying flat on your back. An epidural can also make pushing harder because it's harder to coordinate your birthing muscles because you can't really feel your birthing muscles. It's certainly not impossible to push a baby out with an epidural, but it makes it harder. So you can ask them to turn down the epidural, and more than likely the nurses especially are well trained in guiding you through the process of pushing with an epidural. So it's certainly not impossible. It'll just be a little harder. Something you can also do is the laboring down technique that I mentioned. So just allowing that natural explosive reflex to do a lot of the pushing for you, and then just try to push at the very end. But is usually determined by if you have special circumstances. So for example, if they're like, okay, like we really need to get the baby out, then you might not have that option. You might need to do that more like intense pushing. Okay, a tired uterus. So if you've had an incredibly long labor, your uterus, just like our other muscles, they get tired. You know, if I did this forever, it would be totally pooped, especially after like 12 hours, which many birth experiences go well past 12 hours. So if your uterus just gets totally tired, it might be hard to push the baby out. What I've seen in this situation is care providers recommending a little bit of Pitocin that helps to like give the uterus a little pick-me-up it needs to get the baby out. I've seen that done really effectively, but that's something, you know, you can definitely talk to your care provider about, make a decision together. How long does it take? It's anybody's guess. As I mentioned before, I've seen the pushing phase that lasted for about 10 minutes. For me, it was like 3 hours. So we just don't know. But the next video that I'm going to make that will come out after this one will cover how to make the pushing phase a little bit easier and hopefully shorten it. So definitely watch that video. What is it like for baby? So obviously it's impossible to know exactly what baby's thinking when they're being pushed out. I imagine it's something along the lines of WTF is happening. But one thing we can tell from monitors is that typically when the mom is pushing, especially when she's doing one of those hard pushes, is baby's heart rate usually drops when she's doing the pushing, because usually you're holding your breath and that creates a lack of oxygen. But usually after you do that pushing, you start breathing again, baby's heart rate comes back up. So that's something fairly normal that happens. And that's one reason why the pushing technique of breathing your baby down can be really beneficial, because you're breathing during it. And so baby doesn't have those drops in heart rate. How you do that is you take in a long, strong inhalation, and then you breathe out your nose, but you're envisioning that the power of the breath is moving down the back of your throat, down through your uterus and out the vagina, like in this J formation. And you feel and hear that power and that sound in the back of your throat. So inhale, and as you do this, you feel your muscles pushing down. It works that natural expulsive reflex. So that can help to minimize the drops in baby's heart rate. All right, here's the big question. Will I poop? Maybe. It happens all the time, but one thing I can guarantee is nobody will tell you when you poop. They'll just wipe it away and you'll probably never know. And usually when you poop during childbirth, it's not like this full bowel movement. It's just like little like rabbit turds. It's just a little bit. Okay, so make sure to watch the next video because I'll get all into the nitty-gritty of how to prepare yourself for pushing, how to make it a bit easier. If you have any questions about this, let me know in the comments below.